Put your headphones on. Now.
Welcome to Dreadloop, where the silence feels heavier.
The first thing you should know is that I heard the pendulum before I saw the building's name. I had been sitting in the lobby of the Beaumont Institute of American Industry for somewhere between 3 and 4 minutes. I had ordered a museum guide. The young woman at the front desk wore a name tag that said Camille. She had told me the printer was warming up, and she had been telling me this for longer than 90 seconds. The sound was small. The sound was regular. It arrived behind my hearing rather than inside it. It came in pairs, a soft click and a soft return. The spacing between the click and the return was slightly too long for an old radiator and slightly too short for a clock. I'm a patent attorney. I notice intervals. The interval was wrong. You can sense sometimes that a place has decided about you. I will tell you my name. I will not tell you all of his. I am Ariadne. He is Theo, which is what he prefers, and which is shorter than what is on his birth certificate. We were 30 and 32 that afternoon, 3 years married, on a Saturday drive that we had made together, perhaps a dozen times, and that he had made, alone or with friends, perhaps 3 dozen more. The Beaumont was his place. He had been going there since he was 11. His grandfather had taken him. His grandfather had taken his father, who had not loved it. Theo loved it. Theo loved the way certain buildings hold the weight of an industry without performing it. He loved the model 1936 textile loom on the second floor and the 17 working scale models of the DuPont powder mill on the third. He loved the 1928 photograph of a man in a derby hat next to a 6-foot turbine in a room with 7 windows. Had been to the Beaumont, by his own count, 43 times. I had been once. There are 7 things from that afternoon I have never told my husband. I am going to tell you all 7. He has been to that museum in the years since 35. More times. The total is now 78. He still believes me about everything except this. I want you to understand the trust that goes in both directions of our marriage. Because the trust is the part the building broke. Theo is an electrical engineer at DuPont. He has for 19 years designed substation control systems whose correct functioning is the difference between a city block having power and not having power. He's wrong about almost nothing. I am wrong about more than he is, but I am wrong about specific things. In a specific way. If I tell Theo I have signed a contract for a client, he believes me. If I tell him I think I left the kettle on, he turns the car around. We have, in 12 years of marriage and 3 years of dating before that, built between the two of us a small, careful set of facts about what each of us is reliable on. He is reliable on what he can see in a building. I am reliable on what I can hear in a room. Until that afternoon, those reliabilities had not contradicted each other. Theo and I had agreed, the night before that Saturday, that I would finally see what he had been seeing. I was not bored by his enthusiasm. I was, if anything, slightly tired by it, the way you can become slightly tired by a good thing in a marriage. The 3rd repetition of an excellent joke is still funny. The 40th is its own weather. I do not have an explanation for any of this. I am not sure that what I am about to describe happened the way I am describing it. I am telling you what I remember. I am not under oath. I have practiced patent law for 19 years, and I will tell you that even sworn testimony is on its best day a careful approximation. This is going to be less careful than that. What I know is the interval. The interval is what I have not been able to set down. The afternoon had the calm and slightly bored quality of a good Saturday. The day was clear. The lobby smelled of new wood polish and someone else's coffee. Theo paid for our 2 tickets at the front desk, and Camille, whose name tag said Camille, gave him a cardboard ticket and gave me a different cardboard ticket. The tickets were not the same color. I noticed this. I did not at the time find it strange. I find it strange now. The map We started, as Theo always started, at the lobby map. The lobby map at the Beaumont is large. It is etched into a single brass plate roughly 4 feet by 3, mounted at sitting height to the right of the front desk. The plate is dated 1989. There's a smaller printed version available as a paper handout, and Theo, by long habit, did not pick up the printed version. He went to the brass plate. He read it the way he had read it at 11 and at 15 and at 22 and now at 30-2. I went to the brass plate beside him. I read it. I took out my phone, and because I am a patent attorney and I document my impressions of new spaces the same way I document new patents, with the camera I photographed it. The photograph was clear. I will tell you in a moment that the photograph is no longer in any of my albums. The brass plate listed 6 floors. The brass plate listed 41 named exhibit rooms. The brass plate listed in the 2nd floor section. One room I am going to describe to you carefully now, and that I should not have been able to read. The room was at the end of a corridor between galleries 2C and 2D. The corridor was about 40 paces long. The room was rectangular. It was labeled in slightly smaller engraving than the surrounding rooms, Pendulum Room. There was no number. The other 40 rooms had numbers. The Pendulum Room had a name and no number. I asked Theo, in a voice I tried to make casual, whether he had ever been in the Pendulum Room. He looked at the brass plate. He looked at me. He said, "What Pendulum Room?" I tapped the plate. I said, "The room labeled Pendulum Room, between 2C and 2D." Theo leaned in. Theo's face had the calm professional curiosity of a man who has been politely corrected at work, and who is going to be politely correct in return. He said, "Ari, there's no Pendulum Room." I asked him to look at where my finger was. He looked at where my finger was. He said, "There's a corridor between 2C and 2D. There's no room there. The corridor's just the corridor." I do not remember the first 30 seconds of the next gallery. I remember walking. I remember Theo's hand at the small of my back, which is a habit of his, gentle and slightly proprietary. The hand of a man guiding his wife through a room he loves. I remember thinking that he had not, in 3 years of marriage, ever told me I was wrong about something I could plainly see. The first wrongness, after the map, was small enough that I almost forgot I had noticed it. Gallery 1B was a long room of 19th century industrial portraits. Iron foundrymen, mill superintendents, a railroad lawyer in a high collar. The portraits hung in a single line at eye level. Theo walked past them with the rhythm of a man who has greeted all of them before. I walked past them more slowly. The 4th portrait from the left was a man named by the small brass plaque underneath. Asterisk Henry Cathcart Beaumont, 1851 to 1923. Founder asterisk. The portrait was 3/4 length. Mr. Beaumont was holding a brass watch chain in his left hand and looking slightly to the painter's left. I do not know how long I had been standing in front of him. I know that when I turned to look for Theo, who had walked on, Mr. Beaumont was looking slightly to the painter's right. I turned back. I looked again. He was looking slightly to the painter's left. I did not say anything to Theo about Mr. Beaumont. A portrait that adjusts is something you cannot prove. The thing I will say to you is that the painter on the small brass plaque underneath was named asterisk Garland Beauchamp, 1907 asterisk. The second wrongness was the visitor counter. By the entrance to Gallery 2A, on the 2nd floor, the museum kept a small running tally of total visitors since reopening. The tally was on a brass plate roughly the size of a paperback book. Theo stopped to read it the way he stopped to read every plate. The number on the plate, as Theo read it aloud, was 1,427,318. He said it warmly, gesturing at the two of us, making a small joke for a wife who was being patient with his enthusiasm. I looked at the plate. The number on the plate, as I read it without saying so, was 1,004,000. 128,041. I would have assumed I was tired. The number on the plate, when I photographed it for my own records, came out on the screen as 1,428,041. The number Theo read aloud before I photographed it was 1,427,318. I do not know which of those numbers was on the plate. I know that they were both of them. There, the fourth wrongness was an elevator that was not there. We walked from 2A to 2D along the south wall of the second floor, and on the way, Theo stopped beside a flat patch of wall and frowned. He said, in the particular voice he uses when he has lost his car keys for the first time in 3 years, "I'm pretty sure there used to be an elevator here." The wall was painted the same flat institutional gray as the rest of the corridor. There was, when I looked closely, a faint rectangular outline at about the size of an elevator door, where the paint had been laid down over a slightly different surface. Theo said, "Yeah, that was an elevator. The last time I was here was an elevator. They must have taken it out." He asked a passing docent, a young man with rolled shirt sleeves whose name tag was turned the wrong way, whether the building had recently removed an elevator. The docent looked at the wall. The docent looked at Theo with a polite, untroubled smile. The docent said, "There's never been an elevator on the second floor, sir. We've got the freight in the back, but the public access is the staircase and the lift on the north side. Always has been." Theo accepted this. He said, I must be thinking of a different museum." He moved on. I did not move on. I stood for a moment in front of the painted-over rectangle. I am telling you about it now because of all of the wrongnesses. On the second floor, the painted-over elevator was the only one that had asked me to look at it without me having to look. I had seen it because Theo had stopped in front of it. The building had let Theo see it for the time it took him to ask one question, and then the building had asked the docent on its behalf to gently smooth Theo's memory back into the shape the building preferred. Theo had let the building do that. He had laughed at himself. The building had not asked any docent to smooth my memory. The fifth wrongness was a temperature, the corridor between galleries 2C and 2D. The corridor that did and did not contain a pendulum room, depending on which of us was looking, was when we walked through it together at about 1:15, 4 degrees colder than the rooms on either side. I felt it. I did not say so. Theo, who keeps the thermostat in our house at 68 in winter, and is by his own admission a man who runs hot, did not appear to notice. I have always run cold. I have run colder since. The corridor was windowless. It was lit by recessed bulbs at the ceiling. There were no exhibits in it. It was a passage. The walls were painted a flat institutional gray. About halfway down, on the left wall, there was a door. The door was unmarked. The door was the same flat gray as the wall. The door had no handle that I could see, and no number. I would have walked past it without noticing it if I had not been listening for it, because the third wrongness, behind the temperature, was that I could now hear the interval. I had heard it in the lobby. I had stopped hearing it on the stairs. I was hearing it again in the corridor, and the interval was louder. I asked Theo, with the same casual voice I had used at the brass plate, whether he heard anything in this corridor. Theo stopped. Theo is a good husband. He is a careful man. And when his wife asks him a strange question, he does not answer it lightly. He stood beside me in the corridor, and he listened. He listened for what I am going to tell you was about 30 seconds. He said, "I hear a vent. There's an HVAC vent at the far end. You hear that?" I told him I heard the vent. I did not tell him I also heard the click and the return, 8 to 10 times louder than I had heard them in the lobby, coming clearly from behind the unmarked gray door. No more than 5 paces from where his right shoulder was at that moment. I do not know how to explain to you what I did for the next 45 minutes, except that I am a patent attorney. and the way I have been trained to think about anomalies, is locate the boundary. I walked Theo through the rest of the second floor with the calm of a wife who had recovered from her brief confusion at the lobby map. We went into 2D. We went into 2A. We went up to the third floor and into the powder mill room with the 17 scale models where Theo had been trying to bring me for 3 years. We came back down. We had a tea at the museum cafe on the first floor. The cafe was small and bright. The docent who brought us tea wore a name tag that said Camilla. I have not been able to determine, in the 11 years since, whether the woman at the front desk and the woman at the cafe were the same person. The name tag at the desk said Camille. The name tag at the cafe said Camilla. The faces in my memory are the same face. I have been told by my husband, more than once, that he is certain there were 2 different docents. He has reasons. He pays attention to faces. What I did, between rooms, was listen. The interval came and went. I could hear it in 2A, near the windows. I could not hear it in 2D at all. I could hear it in the staircase between the second and third floors only. At the second floor landing, not on the steps. I could hear it loudest by far, in the corridor between 2C and 2D. Louder than my own breathing. Louder than the docent's voice when she stopped me to point out a patent application from 1894. I could hear it nowhere else on the third floor. The boundary was a room. The boundary was a single rectangular room of which the brass plate map had been aware, and of which, somehow, the rest of the building had agreed not to speak. I tested it. I asked Theo, 3 times across the visit, whether he could hear the click. The first time was in the corridor itself. Theo said, "What click?" The second time was in 2A by the windows. Theo said, "Honey, you're worrying me." The third time was at the first floor cafe, while we were drinking the tea. Theo said very gently, "Ari, are you okay?" I said yes. I asked him whether his ears felt funny. He said no. I said the air pressure had been changing in some of the galleries. He nodded. He said it was probably the Wi-Fi. He took my hand across the table. "I want you to hear me clearly. My husband loves me. He is a careful man, and he was being careful with me. He had begun to suspect, at the cafe, that something was wrong with me. He was not yet suspecting that something was wrong with the building. This is the part I have to be careful with. I sat across from Theo with my hand under his hand, and I did the math I had been trained to do. I had a brass plate map that listed a pendulum room. I had photographs of that map on my phone. I had a husband who could not see the room on the map and could not hear the pendulum from 5 paces away. I had a building that was 4 degrees colder around an unmarked door. I had a small woman in a name tag who was either Camille or Camilla. I had a portrait that adjusted when I was not looking and a visitor count that read 2 ways at once. I had a marriage. I had a marriage in which my husband had never told me I was wrong about something. I could plainly see. I made a decision at the cafe. The decision was that I was not going to tell him about any of it. I was going to let him take me upstairs again. I was going to let him spend 20 more minutes in his powder mill room with his scale models. I was going to walk back down the second floor corridor. I was going to listen one more time to the interval. I was going to know what I was looking at, and then I was going to leave. This is the first of the 7 things I have never told my husband. I made a decision at the CAF not to tell him. The decision held. Phase 5. Controlled tension to 25 minutes and 50 seconds to 42 minutes and 0 seconds. I want to be precise about how I spent the next 40 minutes, because the next 40 minutes are the part of the afternoon I have come back to most often, and they are also the part of the afternoon I trust least. The first thing I want to tell you about is the loom. The second thing is the painter. The third thing is the child. The fourth thing is what I did at the end of the second floor, alone, while Theo was reading a placard about a 1903 turbine, the model 1936. textile loom on the second floor is a beautiful object. It is roughly the size of a small upright piano, mounted on a wooden plinth, and it is operated on the hour by a member of the museum staff who threads a length of cotton through it for the benefit of any visitor who happens to be passing. Theo and I caught the 1:30 demonstration. The docent who operated the loom was a young man with a careful beard, and he did not, while he was working, look up. The room with the loom is small. It is by the brass plate, 15 by 18 feet. It has no windows. The walls are painted a deep red. The light comes from 4 overhead lamps with green glass shades. I stood about 3 paces back from the loom while the docent threaded it. Theo stood a half pace closer on my left. I do not know how to tell you what happened to the temperature in the room, except that it changed in a way I felt on my skin in the space of perhaps 30 seconds. The room had been a comfortable 70. The room became over 30 seconds, a sharp 60-6. The docent did not look up. The half-dozen other visitors did not seem to notice. Theo, beside me, was watching the cotton run through the rollers. I watched my own arms. The hairs on the inside of my forearm had risen. They had not risen on Theo's forearm, which was 3 inches from mine. I have wondered since whether what I am describing was a panic response in my own body. I am willing to consider the possibility. I will tell you that I am not, generally, a panic-prone person. I will also tell you that the temperature in the room returned to 70 after the docent finished his demonstration, in the space of perhaps another 30 seconds, and that I felt my arms warm in the same gradient I had felt them cool. The hairs on my forearms relaxed. Theo's forearm did not change. The second thing I want to tell you about is the painter. I walked from the loom room into Gallery 1B, where Mr. Beaumont's portrait hung, while Theo was still talking with the docent at the loom. I had a question I wanted to answer, and the question was whether the small brass plaque under the portrait said *Garland Beauchamp, 1907 *, or whether it said something else. The plaque, when I read it the second time, said *Garland Beaumont, 1907 *. I read it twice. I read it 3 times. I read it slowly. The plaque said Garland Beaumont. I do not know how long I had been reading it. I know that I was, on the 3rd reading, no longer entirely certain whether I had read Beauchamp the first time or whether I was inventing a difference to give myself something to write down later. I know that the portrait, at this distance, was looking slightly to the painter's left, and that I had stopped checking to see whether it had moved. The painter's name on the plaque, 11 years later in my memory, is both. It is Garland Beauchamp. On some afternoons, it is Garland Beaumont on others. I do not know what was originally on the brass plate. I know that, between the first reading and the second, the plate, or my memory of it, or the part of my memory I had been trained to trust, had begun to drift. I walked back to the loom room. Theo was finishing his conversation with the docent. He looked up. He smiled. He said, "You okay?" I said yes. The third thing I want to tell you about is the child. We were in Gallery 3A, at perhaps 2:15, and I was standing in front of a glass case containing 6 early gas lamps. Theo had walked through into 3B. The room was empty. I am going to tell you that part again. The room was empty. I heard a child laugh. The laugh was small and bright. It came, I thought, from behind the glass case. I walked around the case. There was no child behind the glass case. There was a small wooden bench against the back wall, and the bench was empty, and the laugh had stopped. I have a friend who believes, half-jokingly, that what I heard that afternoon was a recording from one of the educational installations, playing through a speaker I had not noticed. I have looked at the brass plate. There were no educational installations in 3A. There were no speakers in 3A. The closest installation with a speaker was in 3D, 2 galleries away, behind 2 closed doors, and it was, that afternoon, broken. The docent had told us so when We came up the stairs. The laugh repeated. It was, the second time, slightly closer, although still small. It was the kind of laugh a child makes when she has been told a private joke by an adult who is squatting down to her eye level. It was very specific, and it was not happy in the way a child's laugh is normally happy. It was a laugh that was, I thought, performing for someone. I left the gallery. I walked through into 3B. Theo was reading a placard about a 19th century turbine. He looked up. He said, "You okay?" I said yes. The fourth thing I want to tell you about happened at perhaps 2:25. When Theo had gone to the men's restroom on the first floor, and I had gone by myself, back up the staircase to the second floor, I had told myself I would not return to the corridor without him. I had broken that decision, in my head, on the first step. By the seventh step, it was not a decision anymore. I walked up the stairs. I came out at the second floor landing. I turned left, and I walked the length of gallery 2A, and I stopped at the door that led to the corridor between 2C and 2D. Camilla, was standing in the corridor. She was about a third of the way down. She was facing the unmarked gray door. Her back was to me. She was not doing anything. She was not cleaning. She was not adjusting a placard. She was not speaking on a radio. She was not, as far as I could see, even particularly aware that she was standing in a corridor at all. Her hands were at her sides. The light from the recessed bulbs above her made her hair look slightly transparent at the edges. I said her name. I said, "Camille?" And then, because I was not sure, I said, "Camilla?" She did not turn around. She said, in a voice that was quiet and clear, and that did not, particularly, sound like the voice that had told me the printer was warming up. "It only opens for the seventh time." I did not ask her what she meant. I did not ask her whether the seventh time had happened yet, or whether it was about to. I did not ask her whether she meant the seventh visit, or the seventh person, or the seventh sound she had heard from behind the door, or the 7th year since she had started working at the front desk. I am 11 years later, still not certain which of those she meant. I walked back through the door into 2A. I walked down the staircase. I met Theo at the first floor cafe, where he had ordered a second tea. He said, "Did you get to see anything good while I was gone?" I said, "I went up to look at the loom." The third thing I want to tell you about is what happened next, because it is the moment where my marriage and my hearing and my willingness to keep a secret all met one another in the same room. We had come back down the staircase. We were at the bottom of the staircase, at the entrance to the second floor. The corridor between 2C and 2D was visible from where we stood, about 30 feet away. Theo was suggesting we double back to 2A so he could show me a 1903 patent application that he had been wanting to show me. I said, "Could you go on ahead? I'm going to use the restroom." Theo said, "Of course." He kissed the side of my head. He walked through into 2A. I watched him until the door swung shut behind him. Then I turned, and I walked toward the corridor. I will tell you, as carefully as I know how, what I was thinking. I was thinking that I had a husband who loved me, in a building that had decided about me and not about him. I was thinking that there was a small gray door in a windowless corridor, behind which I could hear a pendulum that no one else in the building could hear, and that the door had no handle, and the pendulum was patient, and the pendulum had been patient since before we had walked into the building. I was thinking that the place had been waiting for a moment, exactly like this one, in which my husband was elsewhere, and I was alone in a hallway. And I was thinking that the place had not waited for Theo, because Theo was not the one it had decided about. You can sense, sometimes, that a place has decided about you. By minute 30, I knew the building had decided. By minute 40, I was walking toward the decision I will describe now. The 8 seconds. The corridor between galleries 2C and 2D is, by my counting, 40 paces long. I was at the south end. The gray door was at pace 20 on the left wall. The corridor was empty. There were no docents on the second floor. I had checked from the staircase. Theo was in 2A, which is at the far end of the wing. The interval, when I stepped into the corridor, was already louder than my own breathing. I walked out the first 10 paces. I will not describe in detail except to say that I could feel the temperature drop step by step on my skin. By pace 8, I had goosebumps along the inside of both wrists. By pace 10, the cold had passed through my blouse and was sitting against my back. At pace 15, the pendulum doubled. What I mean by doubled is that the click, which had been a single click, became 2 clicks separated by a very small space. And then the return, which had been a single return, became 2 returns. The interval did not change. The texture of the interval changed. I have wondered since whether what I heard at pace 15 was the same sound twice, or whether what I heard at pace 15 was a second pendulum joining the first. I am going to be honest with you. I have wondered since whether what I heard at pace 15 was the second pendulum recognizing me. At pace 18, I stopped. The gray door was 2 paces in front of me. The gray door, at this distance, was not as flat as I had thought. The paint had a faint vertical seam at the height of about my forehead, as if the door had been painted shut at some point and then carefully repainted to hide the seam. The pendulum, on the other side of the door, was now louder than every other sound in the building. I could not hear anymore the soft murmur of voices from 2D. I could not hear the vague vent at the far end of the corridor. I could not hear my own breathing. I could hear the click and the return, and the second click and the second return, and the spacing between them, which was the same spacing it had been from the lobby and which had been waiting in this corridor for, I do not know, a very long time. The 8 seconds were these. I stood at pace 18. The corridor was 40 paces long. I had walked 18 paces. There was no handle on the door. There was no plaque on the door. There was a small flat painted seam at the height of my forehead, and the gray paint had been laid down over the seam in a single careful stroke. And I do not know how I knew, but I knew, at pace 18, that the door would open if I touched it, and I knew that no one in the building had touched it in the time the brass plate had been mounted. I could hear my own pulse. I could hear the doubled interval. I could not hear my own breathing. I had a thought I want to give to you exactly. The thought was, I am the kind of person who, when given a choice like this, takes the choice that lets me find out. That was the first second. I have been a patent attorney for 19 years and a person for 41. I have, professionally and personally, taken the choice that lets me find out almost every time it has been offered to me. I had taken the choice when I sat for the bar in Pennsylvania at 23, after my father had told me Pennsylvania was a stretch. I had taken the choice when I had said yes, in 2010, to a second date with a quiet electrical engineer who had told me on the first date that he was not, on balance, a romantic person. I had taken the choice when I had walked into the corridor in the first place. I was in front of the gray door, very close to the version of myself I had spent 4 decades being. I had a second thought. The second thought was, Theo is in Tua. Theo is reading a placard from 1903. Theo will be there for 10 more minutes. I have 10 minutes. That was the second. I had a third thought. I will be honest about the third. Thought 2. The third thought was that if I opened the door, I would not ever fully come back from opening the door. I have not been able, in 11 years, to give that thought a more specific shape than that. It was not a feeling that I would die. It was not a feeling that I would be physically harmed. It was the feeling, very calm and very clear, that I would, in exchange for what was on the other side of that gray door, give up a thing about myself that I would not be able to name afterward, and that I would not be able to name now, and that I would walk back into Tua to find Theo, and that the wife who walked into Tua would be, in some unmappable sense, A different woman from the wife who had walked into the corridor. I have wondered since whether the third thought was the building speaking to me, or whether the third thought was me speaking to myself in a voice the building had loaned me. That was the third, fourth, and fifth seconds. The sixth second is the one I wish I could say more about. The sixth second was the one in which, instead of stepping forward, I lifted my right foot and put it down behind me. I do not know what I lifted my foot with. I will tell you that my body did it before my mind did. My body had been listening to the pendulum longer than my mind had, and my body, at the sixth second, made the decision that my mind would, an instant later, agree to make. The seventh second was the second pace backward. The eighth second was the third. I do not remember walking the rest of the way. I remember that the pendulum did not pause. I remember that the doubled interval did not become a single interval again. I remember that at pace 12, going back, the cold lifted off the inside of my wrists. I remember that at pace 8, the soft murmur from 2D came back. I remember that at pace 1, I could hear the gave then again, and that at the lobby end of the corridor, when I stepped out of it and into the wider hallway that ran around the staircase, I could not hear the pendulum at all. I had walked 40 paces toward the room. I walked 40 paces back. The pendulum did not pause for either direction. I want to give you the silence. I want you to count 6 seconds with me. I am not going to speak. I am going to count to 6 in my head. You can count along, or you can listen to your own room. Your room may be a quieter room than the corridor. Your room may not be. 6 full seconds of silence. Went into 2A. Theo was reading the 1903 placard. He looked up. He said, "Hi, honey." He smiled. He said, "Did you find the bathroom?" I said, "I found everything I needed." He took my hand. He squeezed it. He said, "Your hands are freezing." I said the air conditioning in the bathroom was aggressive. He smiled. He believed me. I want you to know that he believed me, completely and without reservation, and that the believing was the part of the afternoon I have since found hardest to forgive. We left the Beaumont at 3:15. We had been there for 2 hours and 40 minutes. Theo bought a postcard at the gift shop of the 17 scale model powder mill. He put the postcard in his wallet. He put his arm around my shoulders as we walked through the lobby, and Camille, or Camilla, or whichever of the 2 women it had been at the front desk, looked up from a book she was reading and smiled at us. She said, "I hope you enjoyed your visit." She said it to Theo. She did not say it to me. I looked at her. She had gone back to her book. The book, I noted as I walked past, was a paperback, and the cover was facing the desk, and the spine, which I could read, was blanked out in the parking lot. Theo asked me if I was okay. I said yes. I said the museum had been a lot. I said I was tired, and that I was glad I had finally seen the powder mill. He kissed the side of my head, the same way he had kissed it inside, and we got in the car. I have not been back to a museum since. I want you to understand that I do not mean I have not been back to the Beaumont. I mean I have not been back to any museum. I have spent the last 11 years politely declining every invitation. I have ducked field trips with my goddaughter. I have not entered the Met, the Smithsonian, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Hagley, the Mutter, or any of the small regional collections that my profession occasionally sends me through. My goddaughter Cleo, who is now 13, asked me 3 years ago why Aunt Ari never wanted to go to the planetarium with her. I told her I had a thing about enclosed spaces. She accepted this. She does not know it is not true. I am, in addition to being unable to enter museums, also able to enter every other kind of enclosed space without hesitation. I take elevators. I have flown 19 times since the afternoon at the Beaumont. I have twice reluctantly entered casino lobbies for client meetings. The thing I cannot enter is a museum, and I am not able to give the thing I cannot enter a name that another adult would understand. I have a colleague named Belial who has, very gently, twice asked me what happened. To me, the first time in 2017 was after I declined to attend a deposition prep at a law office 2 blocks from the National Portrait Gallery. I rerouted my entire morning to come into the building from the south rather than walk. Past the portrait gallery's front steps, Billo noticed. He has not pressed since. He is, in his way, a careful man. He has not told Theo. He does not know enough to tell Theo that I have not told Theo. I have not told the 7 people I know best in the world. You can sense, sometimes, that a place has decided about you. The places that decide about you do not undecide. You learn to plan your life around their decision. Theo has been to the Beaumont in the years since 35 more times. He goes alone. He goes happily. He has shown me, on 2 separate occasions, photographs he has taken of the brass plate map. The brass plate map in his photographs lists 6 floors. The brass plate map in his photographs lists 41 named exhibit rooms. The brass plate map in his photographs does not list a pendulum room. I have looked more than once for my own photographs of the brass plate map. I cannot find them. I had that afternoon 3 photographs of the brass plate map, 2 photographs of the visitor count, and 7 photographs of the 2nd floor corridor. The cloud backup on my phone shows the photographs being taken on the afternoon of September 21st, 2013, at 1:06, 1:07, 1:23, 2:11, and 2:14. The cloud backup shows the photographs being deleted on November 4th, 2014. I do not remember deleting them. I have never deleted a photograph from my phone in my life. I keep the photographs of my dog who died in 2016. I keep the photographs of my mother in the hospital before she stopped speaking. I keep on a dedicated album the photographs of every patent application I have filed for a client. Between 2008 and now, I do not delete things from my phone. I am willing to consider that I deleted them. I am willing to consider that I did not. I have twice in 11 years dreamed about the corridor. The first time was in 2016, on the night before I argued an appeal in front of the 3rd Circuit. The second time was in 2022, on the night before my mother's funeral. In both dreams, I was at pace 18, and the door was open, and I will not tell you what was on the other side, because the dream was not the corridor. The dream was my own mind, 8 years and 9 years later, building a version of the door for me out of what it had on hand. The corridor itself does not visit me. I want you to know that. The corridor stayed in the building. Whatever decided about me decided once and decided durably, and has not, in 11 years, asked me for anything else. I have in the years since tried to remember whether the painter under Mr. Beaumont's portrait was named Beaumont or Beauchamp. I have not been able to. I have in my memory of the afternoon both names. The names take turns. Some afternoons it is one, and some afternoons it is the other. I do not know anymore what was on the brass plaque under that portrait. I have remembered the docent's name as Camille. I have remembered the docent's name as Camilla. I have stopped trying to fix it. I have decided that the woman with the name tag was both and was neither, and that the version of that afternoon I am giving you is, on its best day, a careful approximation by an unreliable witness, who had been a careful witness up until the corridor. I am the unreliable witness. I have made my peace with that. There are 7 things I have never told my husband. The first is that I made a decision at the cafe not to tell him. The second is that the painter under Mr. Beaumont's portrait was named Beauchamp or Beaumont, and that I cannot remember which. The third is that I heard a child laugh in a gallery where there was no child. The fourth is that the temperature in the loom room dropped 4 degrees and rose 4 degrees in the space of 2 minutes, and that the hairs on my forearms rose and Theo's forearms did not. The fifth is that I walked 20 paces toward an unmarked door behind which a pendulum was counting in a doubled interval, and that I walked 40 paces back. The sixth is that, when I returned, my body knew before my mind did that I had given something up by walking back. I do not know what. I gave up. The seventh is that I am 11 years later almost certain I made the right choice, and I am 11 years later almost certain I did not. The seventh is the one I cannot stop turning over. This morning, before I sat down to record this, Theo was at the kitchen table reading the museum's annual newsletter. He gets it in the mail. He reads it cover to cover. He looked up. He smiled. At me, he said, "There's a new exhibit going in on the second floor next month." I said, "Oh?" He said, "They're moving the loom. They're putting in a small thing on Foucault pendulums. The article says the corridor between 2C and 2D is being renovated to accommodate it." He said it warmly. He said it the way you say a small piece of good news to a wife who has been patient with your enthusiasm. The newsletter was on the table between us. I could read the headline upside down. The headline said, "Coming in October, the Beaumont's long-awaited pendulum room." The body of the article, which I read from where I was sitting, mentioned that the exhibit had been in development since 2008. The article did not mention that the room was already on the brass plate and had been since 1989, and that I had photographed it and that I had walked 20 paces toward it. 11 years ago this month, I did not say anything. I poured myself another cup of coffee. I sat down at the table across from him. I watched him read. I do not know whether the room is being made now, or whether the room has been there since 1989, or whether the room is making itself, and the building is rearranging the brass plate around it to give the room a name a polite museum can put on a placard. I do not know whether the click I heard that afternoon was a pendulum, or whether it was a counting that had not yet found a pendulum to belong to. I do not know whether what walked back out of the corridor was the woman who had walked in. What I know is the interval. The interval is what I have not been able to set down. I am not going to go to the new exhibit. You can sense sometimes that a place has decided about you. Sometimes the most you can do is decide back